A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by The Happy President. Part 5, Guiding Our Behavior. Chapter 22, Contingency Management. I influence your behavior, and you influence mine. The more you respond to my presence, however, the more careful I want to be that I don't intrude on your right to your own ways. Each of us can know what we're asking and giving, and avoid the kind of a manipulation in which I trick you into giving something you don't want to give. Then we learn to trust each other. The approach presented here involves studying cause and effect sequences and rearranging them in ways likely to lead to the changes we want. Such cause and effect sequences, or contingencies, are relationships between one event and another in which the occurrence of one makes the other more likely or less likely to occur. Types of contingencies. The results of what I do usually determine how likely I am to do it again. Here's an example. Father is in his easy chair watching TV. In comes little Freddie. Daddy, I want some orange juice. Later. Daddy's eyes remain glued to the screen. Later is a vague response. Freddie stands there. Then, whining a little, Daddy, I want some orange juice. I told you later, Daddy replies, his voice a little sharper. Wait till the commercial. Can't you see I'm watching this program? Has Freddie learned to trust Daddy's promise to attend to him during the commercial? A minute passes. Freddie's voice is now a whine. Daddy, I'm really thirsty. I want some orange juice right now. Daddy, very irritated now, glares at Freddie. Did you hear me? I told you I'll get it as soon as the commercial comes on. Now don't bother me. If Freddie doesn't trust Daddy's promise, he won't accept the commercial limit. Now, Freddie's voice breaks into a loud screech, half whine, half cry. But I'm really thirsty and I really want some orange juice and I can't get it and all I want is... Oh, good grief. All right, I'll get it for you. I've told you not to whine like that. With that, exasperated Daddy stalks into the kitchen. The next day, Freddie's mother says to his father, Henry, I'm at my wit's end. All Freddie does is whine and wail. I'm going to give him a real talking to, replies Henry, and if that doesn't do it, maybe a whipping will. As matters now stand, when Freddie comes up and asks quietly, he gets no orange juice, no payoff, no reinforcement. When he whines, he gets what he wants. Daddy is teaching him to whine by rewarding him when he does and failing to reward him when he asks acceptably. He's selectively reinforcing whining. Giving Freddie a talking to won't help, nor will a whipping. It will help to set responsible limits. Later is not one of them. Giving him satisfaction when he asks quietly instead of when he whines, and letting him know that's what's going on. In response to a whiny shriek, Daddy might commit himself to fulfill the conditions of the limit set. If you ask softly, I'll get your juice at the next commercial, and do so. Whining and shrieking won't disappear completely. The sound an overtired or upset child makes is very likely to be a cross between talking and crying. At such times, I want to drop my shoulders, breathe, be compassionate, and not get upset. Rewarding and punishing events. Reward includes both getting a positive reinforcer, a goodie, and avoiding or escaping from a negative reinforcer, or a baddie. Roughly, a positive reinforcer is something we like to have happen. It is defined more precisely by psychologist B.F. Skinner, who discovered many laws of behavior and pioneered the practical application of behavioral psychology. He described a positive reinforcer as any event that increases the probability of a response. A negative reinforcer is an event that decreases the probability of a response. Punishment may involve either getting hit with a negative reinforcer or losing a positive reinforcer. Once we understand how rewards and punishments operate, events that have puzzled us start making sense. Here are the basic principles we've all experienced. 1. Any act that brings a reward tends to occur more often. 2. Any act that no longer brings the rewards it used to tends to occur less often. Eventually, it may not occur at all or it occurs very seldom. This result is called extinction. 3. Any act that is punished tends to be suppressed, often temporarily, but the potential to act in the punished way is still there. To whatever degree the behavior still occurs, its character is pretty much the same. 4. Both rewards and punishments are more effective the more immediately they follow the event, given that they're strong enough to make a difference. When something I do gets rid of a negative reinforcer or allows me to avoid it or escape from it, I tend to do that more often. Thus, if my first contact with a situation is frightening enough, I may be so afraid of it from then on that I avoid it. So if at some future time the situation stops being frightening, I'll never find out about it. I act like a rat that's been shocked in a certain place and is afraid to ever go near it again, even if the shock button has been disconnected. That's much like what happens with someone who feels burned by love and is afraid to love again. In the experimental lab, it's called avoidance conditioning. As the song goes, I'll never love again. I've been avoidance conditioned. There's also escape conditioning, in which someone repeatedly gets into a situation that was punishing in the past or one like it, and always leaves so fast that he or she never discovers that the situation is no longer dangerous. When Jane, the oldest of 5 children, was only 10 years old, her father died and her mother went to work full-time. Jane took over the household and child care responsibilities. At age 17, she sought escape through marriage. Her husband, 20 years her senior, was abusive and adolescent. After her second hospitalization due to his violence, she divorced him. Now, 10 years later, while she wants a family of her own and a relationship with a man, she allows herself to get into relationships only until physical intimacy is imminent, and then panics and flees. Primary and secondary reinforcement. Escape and avoidance conditioning occur because of a secondary reinforcement. Situations that once were neutral now have themselves become punishing through their association with past pain. We may or may not consciously remember when and how this happened. I don't know why, but I just feel uncomfortable around here. Or, there's something about it I like, but I can't put my finger on it. Primary reinforcers are innate and common to everyone, like food, drink, sex, and the opportunity to satisfy our curiosity. Secondary reinforcers are people, things, or situations that have been connected with primary reinforcers in the past. Through a process of association and conditioning, we now respond to them much as we once responded to the primary reinforcers with which they were paired. Thus, an event that originally was neither pleasant nor unpleasant can, after it's been connected with a reward enough times, itself begin to be rewarding. The good feelings that go with something nice happening rub off on the person or the situation in which it happens. In his novel Island, Aldous Huxley writes, Dr. Andrew picked up the idea in northern New Guinea. Stroke the baby while you're feeding him. It doubles his pleasure. Then, while he's being caressed, introduce him to the animal or person you want him to love. Let there be a warm physical contact between child and love object. At the same time, repeat some word like good. At first, he'll understand only your tone of voice. Later on, when he learns to speak, he'll get the full meaning. Pure Pavlov. Bribery and spoiling. Some people strongly object to the use of positive reinforcement, especially with children. Why, that's just paying them off for behaving. That's bribery. Is it? Let's see. Here's a typical situation involving what we'd call actual bribery. A woman and her little boy are in a store. He's crying. Listen, she says, if you'll behave yourself for 15 minutes, I'll get you an ice cream cone. What happens? For 15 minutes he behaves, pouting and resentful. Then he gets his ice cream cone, and soon he's back to crying. He has learned to do what mother says for 15 minutes. He's probably also learning that misbehavior can pay off. His obnoxious behavior has been reinforced by attention and a bribe for temporary good behavior. Since the obnoxious behavior is positively reinforced, it becomes more frequent. Compare this common reinforcement of irritating behavior to reinforcement of desired behavior. In the same store, when a mother who's consciously using positive reinforcement likes the way her son is acting, she'll tell him right then. She knows that immediate rewards work better than delayed rewards, so she doesn't wait till they get out of the store. By rewarding desired acts immediately, she's rewarding a specific behavior rather than all the behavior that occurred while they were in the store. The boy knows exactly what he's being rewarded for. Some parents spoil or confuse their children. Spoiled children are used to getting what they want. We spoil children by giving them rewards regardless of what they do. Such children grow up feeling that the world owes them a living. That's just one symptom of a graver problem. Since these children don't face the consequences of what they do, they blame others and otherwise avoid taking responsibility for the results of their actions. This has been identified as an issue in teenage suicide. Some people, even when they understand how positive reinforcement differs from bribery and spoiling, still don't like it. A typical protest is, "It just doesn't seem right for me to pay someone off for doing something that he ought to do anyway." That he ought to do anyway usually means that I think he should be doing now. Overlooked is the obvious fact that he hasn't learned to do it yet. That puts him in quite a bind. It's like giving a new worker a task he or she can't perform to your standards of perfection and then getting angry because your standards weren't met. I have found that people who are most opposed to rewarding others for desired behavior are nearly always strong advocates of punishment. Many of us were brought up on punishment-oriented discipline, and we tend to repeat the same pattern. Behavioral psychologists Roland Tharp and Ralph Wetzel found that some clients found ways to punish their children even when this was contrary to the behavioral change plan. They wanted to punish more than they wanted to bring about the changes they sought. Perhaps punishing was a way they could feel their power. It was also a way of displacing aggression that was related to other frustrations in their lives. Discriminative stimuli. We respond to many signals that something is about to happen, or that we should act a certain way, like the restaurant sign that tells me I can eat there. In technical language, the sign is a discriminative stimulus. It's a signal that lets hungry me discriminate between that place where I can eat and others where I can't, like hardware. It's also a trigger, or stimulus, for the response of stopping at that place. Sometimes we can make desired changes just by rearranging such signals in our environment or by changing our ways of using them. Positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is usually, but not always, pleasant. As a school teacher complained, "Johnny constantly disturbs everyone. I tell him, 'Johnny, please be quieter.' Every time I do, he obeys, but 3 minutes later he's doing it again. Even expressing my anger does no good." Attention, even punitive attention, is a powerful positive reinforcer for Johnny. Any kind of attention is better than none at all. So paying attention to him every time he makes a ruckus increases the odds that he'll continue. By ignoring him when he acts up and giving him attention when he's involved in constructive learning, he can be helped to change his behavior. "Johnny, I appreciate the way you've been working together with the other children for the past few minutes." When I asked some teachers to actually keep count, they found that their communication with the children was primarily negative communication. They were amazed and appalled to find out that they were much less likely to talk to a child when something good was happening. Like most adults in our culture, many teachers criticize and punish far more than they appreciate and reward. That sort of thing happens with hypochondriacs. Look how much attention they get when they're sick. Due to these secondary gains, their illnesses take center stage. There's the story about the hypochondriac who finally died. On his tombstone was the inscription, "See?" Some friends of mine taught their daughter to read using positive reinforcement. They began by giving her a raisin for every word she read. After a while, she was reading words fairly well. Then she had to start reading a whole sentence to get a raisin, so the task wouldn't seem too easy. Once she was doing well on sentences, they switched to a raisin for every page. One Sunday morning, the parents were awakened by their daughter's voice downstairs in the kitchen. Curious, they tiptoed down and peeked in. There sat their daughter at the table, a pile of raisins in front of her, reading aloud out of her book and taking a raisin after she finished each page. Token systems involve using some kind of tokens which, like money, can be exchanged for various different items. Gold stars on our chart are tokens if a specified number of them can be converted into goods, privileges, or services the individual wants. My preschool daughter gets poker chips for picking up her clothes and toys, doing simple reading and writing assignments, and sometimes even looking after her younger sister. When we go to stores with her, my wife and I convert them into money for buying items she wants. Token systems that cover many activities and reinforcers, called token economics, are widely used in mental hospitals. Prison systems have initiated token economies where they have sometimes worked and sometimes not. The distinction seems to be whether the institution uses the process for manipulation or education. We can use reinforcement to change our own behavior by making something we'd like to have or do contingent on doing something else that we want to do but otherwise might not. Ernest Hemingway, for instance, used to set himself a daily writing quota. If he produced the required number of pages, he went fishing the next day. If not, he didn't. So at times he burned the midnight oil to earn that fishing trip. A student whose writing habits are much weaker than Hemingway's might reinforce himself or herself with more immediate rewards, perhaps a cup of tea or a treat from the snack bag after an hour of writing, or a half an hour if need be. Appreciation. Along with affection and attention, appreciation is one of the most powerful and widespread social reinforcers. I enjoy letting my wife know I appreciate both the day-to-day things and the special things she does. This kind of reinforcement helps her value herself and do things with more satisfaction. In couples counseling, it's not uncommon for one of the partners in a long-term relationship to say to the other, "I didn't know you enjoyed that." The other then replies, "Well, I expected you to know." That translates as, "I want you to do good things for me, but I won't tell you how or when." By cluing you in instead of expecting you to know and giving you my appreciation when you do things I like, I'm telling you what you need to know to be good to me. Some of us avoid giving each other appreciation because we know how to relate by arguing and being hard and can pretty well predict how the other person will respond. Whenever I'm helping a family straighten things out, I listen for what any of the members don't want to straighten out. If there is long-standing discontent, each of the affected individuals must be gaining something from it or else it wouldn't last. When we want to be warm and loving with each other, we can reward each other directly. I tell you what I want from you and when. I let you know when I'm feeling good about what you're doing, and I show my appreciation by doing things for you that you like. Counselors sometimes fall into the trap of getting sucked in by the problems in a relationship. The couple or family comes in and says, "We're having trouble with." The counselor focuses on the trouble and forgets to find the good places they have together that they can work from. Identifying appropriate reinforcers. What's rewarding to me may not be rewarding to you. One person may like a lot of attention, while another may feel smothered by it. Don't assume that because something is a reinforcer for you, it is a reinforcer for someone else too. One way to identify an effective reinforcer is to ask the person what he or she likes. Another is to observe what that person values doing. What someone wants may depend not only on that person's general preferences, but also on what's happened to him or her lately. When I've just eaten, food is not much of a reinforcer for me. When I haven't had much loving for a while, a big hug and a warm smile are worth a lot. My levels of deprivation and satiation affect what's rewarding or punishing to me and what isn't. Sometimes it's appropriate to identify just one or two important rewards. In other circumstances, a menu of reinforcers may be more appropriate, so that the person whose actions are to be affected can actively choose from a variety of items or activities. The Premack Principle. According to experimental psychologist David Premack, The chance to do something that you often choose to do can be used to reinforce something that you seldom choose to do. This is known as the Premack Principle. Behaviors we want to strengthen are almost always things we don't do as often as we'd like. Low probability behaviors. All of us have some high probability behaviors we could use as reinforcers. Interestingly enough, these are not always pleasant. One woman, for instance, liked to paint in oils, but seldom took the time to do it. She didn't like housework, but felt that she should clean thoroughly each day, so she did. After cleaning, she was usually too tired to paint. Housework was a likely behavior, even though she found it unpleasant. Painting was an unlikely behavior, even though she liked to paint. So, taking time to paint could be reinforced by doing her housework afterward. She changed things around so that she painted first and then did the housework. Soon she was painting regularly. The low probability behavior was reinforced by performing the high probability behavior afterward. Since the consequence, opportunity to do housework, must follow the behavior to be affected, taking time to paint, the other way around wouldn't work. The Premack Principle has another important implication. Almost any behavior can either be reinforced or be a reinforcer. The very act of eating, which can also serve to reinforce doing other things, is sometimes affected by other reinforcers. For instance, "How pleased I am that you're eating well and enjoying your food," mother says as her daughter finishes her dinner. Before, dawdling over food was reinforced by the parent's attention. "Don't play with your food." Of course, the child ate more slowly than anyone else. Now, if she dawdles, her mother ignores it. Positive reinforcement and society. One of the most important contributions of B.F. Skinner has been his consistent emphasis on moving away from learning methods based on punishment, pain, and fear toward those based on positive reinforcement. This is more than permissiveness or leaving a person free to learn. A person raised permissively is free of many of the complexes that haunt those raised punitively, but carried to an extreme, permissiveness means that each person has to reinvent the wheel. Beyond permissiveness is a caring guidance that respects and fosters the other person's independence. Principles of behavior change. Sometimes knowing how reinforcement operates is not enough. Strongly entrenched behaviors may need a systematic program of behavior change using additional principles described here. Think small and be precise. We do best when we set out to change no more than we need to. The more modest our ambitions, the greater our chances for success. Conversely, broader changes invite more to go wrong. The small is beautiful ethic applies here. It's important to be precise. That means defining the change so specifically that we agree on observable criteria. For instance, a positive attitude can be defined more precisely as doing mutually agreed upon tasks without complaint. Doing a chore or not, and complaining or not, can be clear-cut, though some tasks might need more care in definition. Cleaning the kitchen, for instance, can be further defined as clearing and wiping the table and washing the dishes. Such a redefinition of a positive attitude has two advantages. It's smaller and more manageable, and the frequency of the behaviors in question can be counted. Gather data and analyze the contingencies. A behavioral approach to change includes counting how often an action occurs. For a week or two, record every occurrence of the behavior and tally the total for each day. Make a graph with days across the bottom and number of occurrences up the side. This is your baseline. Unless we have a baseline, we might not realize when change has occurred and may be critical of lack of progress when we should be appreciative. A teacher, for instance, sets out to decrease a student's specified disruptive behavior and increase time spent working on assignments. The student's daily average during baseline is 23 specified disruptive incidents a day. 2 weeks after the start of the change program, he may seem as disruptive as ever, causing the teacher to think, "This isn't working at all." Upon checking the record, she discovers that he's averaged only 13 incidents per day that week. Because the disturbances that still occurred were more salient than the decrease, it was easy to overlook the process. Because of the baseline, however, they knew they were making headway. We do more during a baseline period than just count frequency. We carefully observe the behavior we hope to change, the situation it occurred in, what happened just before it occurred, and what happened just afterward. We can sum this up as who is doing what, to whom, under what circumstances, with what effects. These observations provide important information that can help us formulate a change program. One step at a time. When we are trying to learn something that's hard to do expertly right away, it helps to receive rewards for close approximations to the goal. This teaching process is called shaping, or successive approximation. At any point, the learner only needs to do what he or she is capable of doing now. A guitar teacher praises a new student just for forming a chord correctly. Later, much more will be required to earn approval. For ourselves or for others, short-term goals are important. Such goals let us experience successes regularly as we go along, or if we consistently don't meet them, they let us know we might be wise to try another approach. It's important to make these goals reasonable and achievable, and to reward ourselves or the other person when a goal is reached. There are some things a person can't learn until certain prior developmental steps have been taken. For example, there is no way I can toilet train a child before he has developed some control over his sphincter muscle. Behaviordelia, a Michigan collective of behaviorally oriented psychologists and their friends, has a rule for this. Start where the behavior is at, not where you think it should be, and the best way to find out is to look and see. Often, your assumptions about what behavior can already do are all wrong. At the point where a person gets good at a simple task, we can change the criteria. We give appreciation now for something a little more difficult. It is important not to give appreciation for something too easily done, but a good way to get nothing is to ask for everything. The timing and scheduling of reinforcement. Reinforcement works best when it's in proportion to the difficulty or importance of the act, not too much and not too little. Whether the reinforcement comes every time or only every now and then, it must always follow the behavior, and the sooner the better. If it comes beforehand, it probably won't work, as some people have discovered after paying for work before it's done. How often reinforcement comes is also important. Intermittent reinforcement is when we reinforce a behavior only sometimes instead of every time it happens. Behavior that's been rewarded intermittently is hard to extinguish, especially if we don't know just when the rewards are coming. At work, I may have one supervisor who's almost always really there and tuned in. When she brushes me aside, I know she's in a bad place. With her, I'm used to a constant schedule of positive reinforcement, so one non-reinforcement is enough. I'll wait until she's feeling better. With a temperamental supervisor who sometimes responds, I've learned to expect my reinforcements on an intermittent schedule, so I might try communicating with him several times before I give up. If I've been getting a reward only occasionally and I get nothing for a while, things may be as usual. When I'm first teaching myself or someone else to perform a new behavior, I want to reinforce the action I'm looking for every time it occurs. Then, gradually, I want to make the schedule a little leaner and more irregular so that the behavior will persist even when outside reinforcement is not immediately forthcoming. Establishing functional behavior. Change usually endures only when a new way of acting works in dealing with the world and continues to bring rewards. So in deciding to develop a particular behavior, it's important to think about whether there are outside rewards that will maintain it once it's been established, or sometimes inside rewards like those described later. Our prisons, for example, are consistently ineffective when they fail to teach the inmates new skills and ways of acting that will help them once they get out. Arranging the environment, stimulus control. An essential task in managing behavior is to rearrange the stimuli that trigger our actions. When I'm dressed up in my best suit of clothes, my bearing and language are likely to be a little different than when I wear jeans and a t-shirt. Formal clothes serve as a discriminative stimulus for myself and others for more formal behavior. This is called stimulus control, an approach that's especially appropriate when we want an existing behavior to occur more often or less often. Narrowing. Narrowing is a form of stimulus control in which we reduce the number of different cues that trigger our behavior. With a man who spent hours brooding and sulking, for example, behavioral psychologist Israel Golddiamond advised him to sulk to his heart's content, but in a special place, on a sulking stool in his garage where he might sulk and mutter for as long as he wished. The approach to overeating described in the next chapter follows the same principle. Strengthening controlling cues. This involves strengthening the signals that evoke a given behavior, controlling cues, or making them more distinctive. I feel more like doing yoga, for instance, when I put on a tape of Indian ragas, and meditation teachers recommend setting aside a special corner to meditate. Golddiamond advised a young woman who had trouble studying to replace her dim lamp with a good one, turn her desk away from her bed, and use it only for studying. If she wanted to write a letter, read comics, or daydream, she was to do so in another room, not at her desk. She replied, "I'm not going to let any piece of wood run my life." Golddiamond said, "On the contrary, you want that desk to run you. It is you who decides when to put yourself under the control of your desk." After a week, the student reported that she spent only 10 minutes at her desk, but had studied during that time. Golddiamond congratulated her and suggested that she double the time next week. By the semester's end, she was spending 3 hours a day studying at her desk. Eliminating alternative or competing responses. The foregoing example illustrates the principle of keeping yourself, or the other person whose behavior is being changed, from engaging in extraneous activities while you are trying to control a given kind of behavior. The student was told not to do anything except study at her desk. Fading. The stimulus that triggers a response can be changed through fading, like a dog owner who starts by shouting aloud, "Sit!" while pushing his dog down on his haunches and, as the dog learns the response, gradually reduces the signal to a much quieter command. One approach to teaching someone to write begins with tracing the letters, then fading the tracing lines to dots, and gradually fading out the dots entirely. The difference between fading and shaping is that shaping involves the gradual change of a response while the stimulus stays the same. Fading involves the gradual change of a stimulus while the response stays the same. There are 2 other points to remember in using stimulus control. First, it may take a while for a new discrimination to become strong enough to overrule old habits. Second, even the cleverest applications of stimulus control are likely to be short-lived unless the new behavior sequence is followed by positive reinforcement. Intrinsic motivation. A criticism sometimes leveled at the use of reinforcement is, won't the person become dependent on the reward and never learn to like the activity itself? Where the goal is to get people to like learning for its own sake, that's a real issue. As we all know, certain tasks are intrinsically motivating as others are not. It's rewarding to follow our curiosity and find answers. Incentives like grades and threats stimulate artificial interest in tasks that may or may not be intrinsically interesting. Social psychologist John Condrey, reviewing numerous studies on intrinsic motivation, concludes that the short-term and long-term effects of rewards often are directly contradictory. A large reward is more likely to get someone to act as desired immediately, but is less likely to generate continuing interest in behaving that way. A smaller reward, by contrast, is less likely to cause immediate change, but if it does, it's more likely to lead to long-term intrinsic interest in that way of acting. For instance, a verbal praise as a reward often enhances intrinsic motivation under the same conditions that material rewards undermine it. We infer either, I must have done it because of the payoff, or the incentive was so small that I must have done it because I wanted to. Our resulting dilemma: should we use a larger reinforcement to get immediate change, or a smaller one to maximize feelings of intrinsic interest, running the danger that it might not be enough to bring about the desired change at all? When we need to keep on motivating an action rather than doing so just once, diminishing the initial every time reinforcement into an intermittent and then a very occasional schedule provides a solution. I might tell myself, since I get an external reward for doing this only every now and then, I must be doing it the rest of the time because I want to. When intrinsic interest in something becomes strong enough that doing it becomes its own reward, extrinsic reinforcement can be dropped. End of chapter 22.